On today's show, we have Aaron Burns. Aaron, thank you so much for chatting with me.
Excited to be with you tonight, Jacob.
Yeah. So, if you don't mind, we just open up and you could just tell our viewers and our listeners a little bit about yourself.
That's always a fun and interesting question. So, I live on a 60-acre farm outside of Detroit, Michigan, and just I've got 5 kids, so that's always an adventure. My wife Andrea and I have a 10-year-old all the way down to a 3-month-old right now. And we make movies. So we travel around the country and around the world, producing films and telling stories to point people to the things that matter most. So I've been doing that since I was a kid. Kind of grew up in the backyard, playing around with my family. And I say my dad told me good stories most every night. And my mom gave me great books to read, and just fell in love with storytelling and the power of what a good story well told can do, how it can shape and influence. And as I grew older, had a desire to tell stories and share the things that matter to me with the world. It's been quite a journey getting from there to here, though.
I come from 5 myself. There's 3 brothers and a sister. 4 brothers, including me, and a sister. And so growing up, it was always real busy, and went through a lot of milk.
It is always real busy here, that's for sure. My wife actually homeschools our kids, so they're able to travel with us, and we'll all, head together to a location. The last 3 years, we've done a film in Colorado, one in Arizona, one in Georgia, and back home in Michigan, development and prep on the different projects. But it's always an adventure to travel with a big family like that.
Well, tell us about your movie Birthright Outlaw that recently released. Tell us about that movie.
Yeah, so Birthright Outlaw we shot just outside of Tucson, Arizona. So it's a good old-fashioned Western. For all the movies that I make, we have 4 words that we target. At my company, call it Burns & Co. So those words are timeless, faith, family, adventure. So when you're watching one of our movies, that's what you'll get. And we love inviting other individuals and families to come along and join us on the adventure of making the film and then of watching it. So Birthright Outlaw is set in the 1890s Old West in the middle of nowhere, Arizona. And you have a story of a pastor, local, prairie pastor, and his wife, and their one daughter. And the world seems calm and peaceful until some outlaws show up and expose the hidden past of the pastor's wife. And turns out she had some dealings with an outlaw gang in her past, and everything kind of unravels when their daughter's kidnapped. And now the husband and wife have to track the kidnappers across the desert to try to rescue their daughter, while they're working to solve their own marriage and work through all the web of lies and deceit that they've been participating in for these last years. So a lot of adventure, a lot of drama, and a lot of heart as we explore really the themes of identity and redemption, and is there a place for me? Can I be okay with the past and the failures and the brokenness I've had? How can I come to grips with those things and share those with others and find healing from those issues? So just a lot of fun mixed in with a lot of heart.
Yeah. Well, it's always good to have, movies that your kids that are friendly to watch, and you don't have to worry about watching a movie with your family and then something coming up and then you have to explain what that means. And so it's always good to have, films like that you don't have to worry about so much explaining, pretty much every scene to your kids.
Yeah, we love making films that a family can watch together, but we also love to put in films, not things that you have to explain in the way that you're thinking of, but to have things that are deep and complex and profound that will stay with you after and will spark those conversations around a family gathering. I know that as a kid, those are my favorite kind of movies, the ones that as soon as they're done, you want to go watch it again, or you want to talk about it with someone, you want to share those questions and those life issues that their characters are wrestling with. So that's one of the things that we hope that our films do spark conversations and opportunities for dad to sit down with his kids and watch the movie, have a great time. The kids have a great time. And afterwards, there's some wonderful conversations to have as well.
So how was it working with Lucas Black? You know, he's known for all of the Fast movies, and then of course Sarah Drew. I think of her from the movie Radio, I believe she was in. And
Mm-hmm.
so, how was it working with those two in that movie?
Man, we had such a good cast on Birthright. I'd worked with Lucas one other time on a film that we shot out in the mountains of Colorado, and Lucas is absolutely the real deal. So he is himself. He's just a wonderful dad and husband, and his family came out and joined us on the adventure as well. It's funny because in the movie he's playing a parson who kind of doesn't really have much education around guns and outlaws and adventure and all those things. He's kind of a quiet type who, through the course of the film, his wife, who has the outlaw past, is teaching him how to shoot, is coaching him how to deal with this other world. But in real life, Lucas is an expert gun handler and a hunter and all those things. So it
Yeah,
was fun. He's actually coaching the other actors on how to do it, and then pretending to be coached as well. But just his heart for our crew, his heart for the story, really was so much fun to have him on the project. And of course, he comes from giant Hollywood sets and giant Hollywood productions, but then for him to come and play in the sandbox that we had out there in the desert was a blast. And Sarah was such a joy to work with as well. You wouldn't think of her, from a lot of her other roles as this feisty, adventurous, gunswing outlaw. But that's who she became. She read the script and just loved the part. And so we had a lot of fun diving into her character, diving into her past, unpacking those layers together, and watching the sparks and the chemistry between the two of them as they're playing husband and wife on the screen and working through their relationship. It was so much fun to direct them, and just to watch them enjoy galloping around on horses and shooting the shotguns and the pistols and all those things was fun for me as well. Very rewarding experience.
yeah. Well, you recently released a devotional back this like a month ago or so, praying with
Mm-hmm.
Saint Patrick. And do you mind telling us about that?
Sure. So I've written movies. Usually I'll partner with another writer where I'm writing the story and then we're coming together to write the script and the screenplay for most of the films that I direct or produce, but never written a book before. So one of the screenplay writer who has done a number of films with me, a guy named Matt Michelatis, and I were talking about one of my heroes, a hero of the faith, this guy named Patrick, who lived 1,500 years ago. And I was telling him the just remarkable story that I'd never heard before. And he said, we should write a book. And Matt's written, over a dozen books that have been published and, just well received and well read. So he introduced me to the book writing side of things. I had so much fun working with him to unpack the story.
Where can people pick up a copy of that book?
Yeah, so Praying with St. Patrick is available pretty much everywhere. It's published by Tyndale, so it's on Amazon and everywhere you might look. So just coming off of St. Patrick's Day, just last week, you mind if I share briefly kind of the story of his
Go
life?
for it.
Cool.
Absolutely.
So Patrick, like a lot of people think of him, you think of Ireland, you think of green beer and snakes and leprechauns and rainbows. And if you're like me, you wonder, was he, even a real person? Is he like Robin Hood that, or King Arthur may or may not have existed? And I'm, one of 33 million Americans of Irish descent who, we claim to be Irish around St. Patrick's Day. But I just had no idea. Oh, there we go. Yeah, we got another Irish boy here. I had no idea that, the extent that we know about his life and why he's still celebrated to this day. So I stumbled on two letters he wrote. One's called The Confession and the other's called The Letter to the Soldiers. And in these documents, they're autobiographical letters that reveal just this remarkable story of someone who's not Irish. He's actually British. So, zoom back 1,500 years. It's the end of the Roman Empire. And you've got this young man, 15-year-old Patrick, who lives on the coast. His dad's like a minor official and a deacon in the church. His grandpa's a priest or a pastor. And they're pouring into him love and truth and the message of Jesus. And Patrick's like, yeah, I'm good. I'm not interested in any of that stuff. until at age 15, he's captured by Irish pirates and hauled across the sea and spent 7 years as a slave in Ireland. And it's at that time where the things his dad taught him come back to mind, and he comes to a genuine faith. And he says he learns to pray. And through that circumstance, at the end, he winds up escaping, and nobody ever makes it back from Ireland. Once you're gone, you're gone. He makes it back. God leads him to a ship that he's able to get on and escape and come back home. And he says, "Oh man, I finally made it back. I can rebuild my life. Thank you, God, for saving me." And God says, "No, I didn't save you just to save you. I saved you so you could share my love with the rest of the world, and particularly the people who enslaved you." So he's now given a vision to go as a missionary back to the people who'd enslaved him. And that's just exactly what he does. Through more trials and adventures, he winds up leading a mission over there and starts by serving the lowest of the low, the slaves and the women and the people who needed his help the most, penetrating through the darkness of that island. And you see the human trafficking that he was a victim of come to an end. You see the human sacrifice that was a part of the Druidic religions of the time come to an end. And it ushers in what scholars call the golden age of saints and scholars. It's 300 years of monasteries and hospitals and education, just going across Ireland, and then people sharing the love of Jesus, Irish missionaries, from there around the world. And I look at that and say, I have no idea. Like St. Patrick's Day, you think is just a bunch of, green nonsense, but that's what we're celebrating. So we wrote this book inspiring by his letters, by what he left behind, and by his prayers in particular, to, share his story and inspire us to live like he did as much as we can today.
That is fascinating. I have always wondered, though, about the green thing. Like, who came up with that, or was that, a folklore tale or whatever? So,
if you get a chance to go to Ireland, it is they call it the Emerald Isle. It is incredibly green, actually, when the rain falls and hits the hills and the mountains. It is very green. So Ireland itself is deeply, richly, beautifully green. So it's interesting as you look at Patrick's story through history, his impact was so large that many different people co-opted his power, co-opted his story into their own, for their own ends. So, 300 or 400 years after he died, two churches started competing and said, "No, Patrick died in our town, and so we're the town that officially hosts St. Patrick." And then another said, "No, he actually died in our town." In his letter, he says, "Guys, I don't care if I die and buried in an unmarked grave as long as I can serve the people of Ireland." And, it goes from there to political leaders, and even, in the American Civil War. And nowadays, Patrick, gives me 15% off getting your roof repaired on a little coupon code that comes out, right? So it's all kinds of ways his story has been corrupted and abused. But I think one of the interesting ones is the legend about the snakes. It says St. Patrick drove the snakes out of Ireland. And if you look at, historical records, there were, Roman naturalists who said, it's interesting, in the island of Hibernia, they called it, there aren't any snakes here. So where did that legend, originate from? And I think as we studied some of the ancient religious practices, one of the gods, one of the deities that they worshiped was this three-headed snake monster. And I think, as I look at it, I think it was him driving out the demons and driving out the evils of some of their society at the time, that then morphed into the legend of him actually driving out the physical snake. So you can see we have the two concrete letters that Patrick wrote, and then a whole bunch of myths and a whole bunch of other legends that grew around it as well. So for our book, we started with the actual letters. And then just kind of, as you read it, you'll go through the story of his life, all that we know about him, and then his teaching on prayer and his example to us. So much fun to get to go over to Ireland, spend a few weeks there, get to know Patrick. And he's almost like a friend. I spent the time with him in reading what he has to say, thinking about the way he lived his life. And it's just amazing, the example of somebody who lived that long ago, how relevant they still are today.
Yeah, that's definitely a place that's on my bucket list to go to, is Ireland. I bet it's amazing. Now, when you were there, did you get to meet any of his descendants or anything like that?
So Patrick didn't have any descendants, any physical descendants. But he says in his letter that he has many spiritual descendants. And he had two of his prayers that are interesting to me, kind of on that topic. He said, I pray that I'd leave a legacy for my spiritual children, that they would follow Jesus and they'd love the people around them as they've seen me do that. And God answered that prayer with a huge yes. He said, I'm giving you and blessing you with this legacy of all of these spiritual children, even though you never had children of your own. Then he has another prayer and he says, I pray that everyone who hears about Patrick, when they think of me and they think of what God did here, they wouldn't think of me, but they would think of Christ. And I was reading that and I said, that prayer hasn't been answered yet. Because when you think of Patrick, you think of green beer and leprechauns and nonsense and those things. So it was an inspiration for us as we were writing the book to be a part of answering that 1,500-year-old prayer. But yeah, no descendants other than spiritual descendants, which is kind of profound. He gave up so much to obey God and to serve and love the people that, originally had been the ones who enslaved him, that he identified at the end of his life as Irish, even though that's not where he started.
Now, Aaron, there is a project that you are a part of. I don't know if you're finished with it or you just started or what, but the one of my favorite Christmas movies ever, It's a Wonderful Life, and you have a movie coming out called A Truly Wonderful Life, about the life of Jimmy Stewart. Could you tell us about that project?
Sure. So yeah, just like you, Jacob, grew up watching It's a Wonderful Life. I think it's the best Christmas movie ever. One of the, AFI ranks it as like the number one inspirational movie of all time. So you watch it and it's so profound. It's so full of hope. It's so, moving. And I feel like the director, Frank Capra, and Jimmy, what they create with that character and that journey is so inspiring. But, most actors, if you dig in the behind the scenes of most Hollywood stories, there's just not much meat there. It's a lot of, divorced 5 times and, just disappointing kind of sad things. So when I stumbled on some information in an article that said, well, Jimmy Stewart actually was a pilot in World War II. He flew bombers and he wasn't, he rose to the ranks. He was a squadron commander leading thousands of men in combat, flying these daylight precision bombing runs over Britain. And after that, he came home and made It's a Wonderful Life. I thought, man, that's so interesting. So did some more digging on it. And found out that he had already made a Philadelphia Story, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. He already won an Oscar. He was at the peak of his career when he chose to leave to serve his country. And through the course of the war, he winds up, coming down with what we now call PTSD. They called it back then flak happy. And just he was giving so much that it was affecting him, very deeply. So he comes home from the war, a broken, washed up, old man who MGM doesn't want to renew his contract. And he's balding and gray hair and hard of hearing in one ear and just broken. There's nothing there for him in Hollywood. And it's in that moment of lowness and desperation and brokenness that his friend Frank Capra comes and said, I've got the perfect movie for you. It'll revive your career. It'll revive mine. It's the movie that America needs to heal from the war. Jim's like, oh, tell me about it. He said, oh, it's this great story about a suicidal father and an angel, and it's a Christmas movie. It's like, that's the worst pitch for a film I've ever heard. But of course, he goes on to make it, and it becomes just a timeless classic. And in the course of that film, Jimmy later wrote, he found his own personal healing. And that scene in the Martini's bar where he's praying, that prayer became a real prayer for Jimmy. And so as I started to unpack these layers and even hear about his relationship with his father, who was a deep man of faith and was praying for him through the course of the war, he sent Jimmy off with a copy of Psalm 91 and a letter saying, I love you, Jimmy. I'm praying for you. I'm trusting God to bring you back and keep you safe and to guide you on all of your journeys. You see this divine thread through it, and you see George Bailey's life in It's a Wonderful Life mirroring the life of Jimmy Stewart in such profound and beautiful ways. So we were able to connect with Kelly Stewart, one of Jimmy's twin daughters, and when talked to her about her dad and about the war and what she remembers, and she was able to share a lot of additional insights for us as we're working on partnering with her to tell the story. And Lord willing, bring it to audiences everywhere soon. So right now, yeah, we are in the early phase development. We've had a bunch of meetings with studios and potential partners, and hoping to just get that movie into production pretty quickly here. It's been a very exciting season and a story that I've always wanted to tell. So we're so grateful that Kelly's giving us the chance to do that.
Do you guys have someone in mind to play Jimmy?
Oh man, that's going to be so. That is such a fun question, right? Because he's such an iconic actor. But we don't want someone who just everybody kind of has a Jimmy Stewart voice. I won't try to do mine, but the way he talks, the way he moves, all those things. We don't want to find someone who's going to mimic him, but who will really embody him and go on the journey that Jimmy goes on. It's so interesting to me the layers of performance that he was. He was very much an introverted, kind of quiet personality. But as we were talking to Kelly about this, she said he was very content to be quiet. But there were moments all throughout his life where he would stand up and make a speech, and even thinking combat, leading his men, leading thousands of men, giving the briefings, jumping in the bomber. He's at the radio at control, speaking to thousands of airmen as they're flying, in these giant battles. And Kelly was explaining to us, if you think about it, you can visualize it as well. He was an introverted, quiet guy, but the person he was deep inside was the person that came out when he was performing. So he would use his gift of communication and his gift of performance to share his heart with the world. And you see that in It's a Wonderful Life, that the Jimmy who is portrayed on screen is the Jimmy who's deep down buried inside. Or sorry, the character portrayed on screen is the Jimmy that's played inside. And that's why his performances are so authentic, because he's truly delivering the kind of man that he wants to be and that he aspires to inspire us to. So as we were looking at those things, I said, man, I want to make this story. This is the kind of man that I want my kids to know about. And I want to be able to introduce future generations to. As long as we love his movies, we need to learn about this American hero as well. So don't have the Jimmy picked out yet. Have a few people we'd love to talk to about it, but have just been looking for the perfect person who won't just mimic it, but can really embody the character the same way that Jimmy Stewart did with the characters he played years ago.
Sure. Yeah, I back this past Christmas, I listened to a podcast with I don't remember his name. I mean, he's a well-known dude, but he's the guy that played oh my gosh, what's the character's name in A Christmas Story? Ralphie. He played Ralphie, and he has his own podcast that he goes through all the Christmas classics, and he talks about them, and he brings people on that were a part of the film in some form or fashion. And he covered It's a Wonderful Life, and they had talked about how they filmed it in the middle of the summer and it was so hot, and the scenes that George Bailey was sweating because of stress, he was actually sweating because it was so hot outside. So I thought that was pretty crazy.
Yes, so interesting. And the whole some other just kind of fun behind the scenes with that movie. Frank Capra, who directed Mr. Smith Goes to Washington with Jimmy Stewart, also went off to war, and he made this whole docuseries, Why We Fight, trying to explain the evil of Nazi Germany and what they were trying to do with the war. So he came back, as well, a veteran and all these things, was trying to reestablish his footing in the industry. He started a new company called Liberty Films to launch, with the making of It's a Wonderful Life. So trying to raise the money, trying to build this set. They built a whole studio backlot with 4 or 5 acres of buildings. And so the whole, Bedford Falls isn't a real town. It's all this fictitious set. And they had developed this new fake snow techniques. You'll see behind the scenes pictures of these giant cranes with fans blowing this fake snow across, Southern California summer.
Yeah.
Right. And when the film came out, it wasn't a huge hit. It got an Oscar nod or two, right, but it wasn't a gigantic box office hit. And it actually bankrupted Frank Capra's company. It wasn't until a number of years later that the copyright actually slipped, and it went out of copyright for a while. So it was in the public domain. So 10, 20 years later, 30 years later, TV stations started saying, well, this movie's free for us to play. Let's air this during the holidays. And people were reminded of the film and started watching it again. And his popularity just soared even higher than it had been when it first came out. And through that
Mm.
journey, you see it becoming one of the greatest films that we look back on and recognize today. So just interesting quirks of history, around that and other things. I'll share one more fun story. The scene after Jimmy's brother in the movie, his wedding party, the old crazy uncle goes stumbling off to head home at the end of that scene, and there's a huge crash sound. And then the actor shouts from off camera, I'm all right, I'm all right. What actually happened is a lighting technician knocked over a piece of equipment and made this big smash sound.
Mm.
And then they just ad-libbed the line. So all kinds of fun, pieces in there that we'll explore some of the behind the scenes. Our act 3 is, kind of exploring some of those moments and just the fun of the set and the stress for a guy who just come back from the war, didn't know if he could act again, didn't know if he still had it, and was suffering from PTSD. So even the explosions and the jumpiness on set are echoing through his mind. Interestingly, in that scene where he's yelling at his daughter about playing the piano, that iconic scene, he went off on the cast around him, and the cast was kind of actually frightened, saying, "Is this guy okay? Like, he's way overdoing this performance. He's actually yelling at us." And of course, when you watch the movie, it's so authentic. But that's the pent up emotions that he was going through that he allows us to participate in as his audience.
Yeah, we're excited, and we can't wait to hear more about this film that you're working on, and so be looking forward to it. And so, Aaron, with our first time guests, we like to do something called favorite things, and so I'm going to give you a word, and you just give me your favorite thing in that category. Sound good?
All right, let's try it.
All right. What is your favorite food?
Ice cream.
Ice cream. All right. Certain kind?
Oh, I'm not picky. I'll take just about any kind.
What is your favorite movie?
Oh man, It's a Wonderful Life is great. We were just talking about that. That is such a classic. I really love the movie Gladiator. It was the Ridley Scott epic war movie from way back in the early 2000s. If I was going to say my favorite, that's definitely one of them. But yeah, we'll go with those two for now.
Do you have a favorite show that you like to watch or binge?
I would say my favorite show is probably the miniseries Band of Brothers. That's my favorite TV content ever made. It's a World War II miniseries. It's been out forever now, but they just made another kind of installment in the series with the Eighth Air Force movie called Masters of the Air, which is the same Air Force that Jimmy served in. So it was fun for me to watch that. Recently, there's some stuff you got to skip around a little bit, but enjoyed that. But yeah, my favorite TV content is that old miniseries Band of Brothers for sure.
Do you have a favorite musical artist of all time?
Oh, of all time, man, that is a crazy question. I studied music in college a little bit, classical music and stuff. So Beethoven is a pretty big fan of Beethoven. If I'm allowed to go that far back in music history.
Is there a dream actor or actress that you would like to work with?
Oh man, it's interesting as we talk about Jimmy Stewart. He was called the everyman of his day, and he just played someone who was so relatable. You just felt like you knew him, and he could be a friend of yours. I think for me, Tom Hanks is probably that guy. He's just in all of his roles, you like him, you connect with him, you relate to him. So he's someone that I love his work. It's so much fun to watch him at work, and it'd be a blast to get to work with him someday.
I can text him and just say, "Hey, you want to play Jimmy Stewart?"
You never know.
Yeah, you never know. Do you have a favorite podcast?
So probably my favorite podcast is one called Hardcore History with Dan Carlin. It's just, he goes through ancient historical events and does kind of a storyteller's analysis of it. So I've always enjoyed listening to his podcast.
Yeah. This might change from time to time, but do you have a favorite Bible verse?
My favorite Bible verse is Psalm 139:16. And so Psalm 139 is, I call it the storyteller's psalm. It starts off and David says, "You've searched me and know me. You know when I lie down. You know when I get up. You know what I'm thinking. You know all my ways. he's kind of freaking out because God knows so much about him. It's almost awkward. And he works his way down a few verses till he gets to verse 16, and he says, all my days, you ordained all my days before one of them was written in your book. Or written in your book before one of them came to be. So he is viewing God as an author and a storyteller. And he says that you have laid out the days of my life. You've written them down in your story before they come to be. And that brings me so much comfort as a writer and a storyteller. I love my characters. I know my characters. And I put them through challenging circumstances and challenging ups and downs because it's a great story, and to grow them and shape them. And you don't want your character static from act 1 to act 3. You want to see them evolve and grow and be challenged. And so thinking as God is writing the pages in my book, as God is writing the pages in your book, that he's doing that through the storyteller lens. He sees all of us. He's there with us through the journey, and he's shaping these stories for our good and his glory. And that thought has been a comfort to me as I've gone through many deep challenges on my journey, knowing that God is sovereignly laying out those plans, and he's doing it with a heart of love and a storyteller's.
Yeah. Well, Aaron, what is next for you, and how can our listeners keep up with you?
Yeah, so next for us, I have a film that I didn't direct, I produced, called The Forge, that's coming out at the end of August. So my good friends Alex and Stephen Kendrick have been working on this film for quite a while. I produced it with them last summer. We're just finishing post-production on that now. The last visual effects are coming off the line, and you can see the trailers for that. So it's a movie about discipleship, which is a very important theme in my life. I've been mentored and discipled by some great godly men, and very excited for this film to get out there and encourage his audiences along those lines. So that's called The Forge. It's coming out in August. And then, we're really excited to move into production on the Truly Wonderful Life project. So that's the next one on the horizon for us from a production perspective. And you can check us out on Facebook at Burns & Co. My company is Burns & Co. So we think of company not as in like a business, but as a group of adventurers. So you hear Robin Hood and Company. The original idea of a company is a group that comes together to go on an epic quest. So that's who we are. Have a great team, and love to grow that team when we move into production, and then bring all the families who want to go on adventures as well to come along with us on the journey. So we have 4 words: timeless faith, family, adventure, and that's what the kind of stories that we aspire to tell. So check us out on Facebook or at burnsco.uk.
Well, to wrap up, I'd like to see if you'd be willing to share something that God's been doing in your life recently that would help build our viewers and listeners' faith.
Yeah, so just tagging back, let me talk about, there's so many things, just trying to pick one. Let me say, can I share 2? Is that okay?
Sure, go
All
for
right,
it.
so from the book, I have a pile of them sitting here. So praying with St. Patrick, one of the things that I noticed in his life, I'm a go-getter. I'm like, let's do this. Let's make stuff happen. Let's go. Let's take over the world for good and share God's love and all these things. Sometimes God calls us to wait. And waiting is one of the hardest things to do. Waiting well is one of the hardest things to do. And so in the book, we have a meditation on waiting. And you look at Patrick's life, all the things that God gave to him to do, tremendous impact, tremendous fruit from his work. But he had several seasons where he was just waiting. He was trapped in slavery for 7 years. When he gets back home and is called to go back to Ireland, he's trapped for a long period of time and unable to move forward, having to trust God that he's been called, but that the time isn't right for him to go yet. And he waits until the time is right. And I see that theme in scripture as well with King David, who's anointed to go and become the king of Israel, but the time isn't right. He needs to wait. And I think for all of us as humans, we don't like waiting, whether it's in the line at a grocery store,
Right.
whether it's for the church service to start, or whether it's for all of your dreams to be fulfilled. And as I think about that, learning to wait well is important, and learning to trust God, our storyteller, through the process. So that's one. And the other, I'll tie into it as well. It's this concept of hope. So movies that inspire often give us hope. Books that inspire give us hope. And we're commanded to hope in the scriptures. But I was looking in First Peter, the idea of hope. He says, Peter tells us to place your hope fully on the grace that will be given to you at the resurrection of Christ. And I thought about that and I said, hope, usually when I'm hoping for something, I'm hoping in the future. I say, well, I hope that in a few weeks, my meeting with the studio goes well. I hope that I can cast this guy in my movie. I hope that my kids behave well tomorrow. I hope that, I don't get sick.
Right.
And all of these hopes and dreams you have, whether there's something small or something huge, are hopes that we place in the future. But Peter says, don't hope in the future. Place your hope in eternity. Eternity is certain. And we know that the hope that is going to be given to us, that's when God will wipe every tear from your eye. That's when all the wrongs will be made right. That's when you can truly hope and know that it's not just a vain hope, but it's a sure and concrete hope. And then as you look at that hope, place it in the future, the promise that you have is not that any one thing is going to work out in the life between here and there. The worst might happen. Bad things are going to happen. Your life is going to be challenging, but the hope you have for this life is that your Savior will be walking with you through that journey. And I love Psalm 23, which says, even when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil because you are with me. So don't fear the future, even though it is uncertain, and you will probably walk through dark things because you have the storyteller who wrote the story right there with you. Don't put your hope in the future because the future is uncertain. Put your hope in eternity and find joy knowing that all wrongs will be made right and all your dreams, as they align with what God's dreams are, will be fulfilled in that season to come. So that's hopefully some encouragement and hope for your listeners of some things God's been teaching to me.
Well, Aaron, thank you so much for chatting with me. Praying with St. Patrick. That devotional is out now, available wherever books are sold. And Birthright Outlaw, is that on a streaming service where people could check it out?
It's actually, it was originally on one streaming service, but now it's on home entertainment. So it's available quite a few places. Yeah. Actually, the DVD just released. So I know it's in airlines and DVDs, and I think it's coming to Amazon Prime soon. But it's on, right now it's on a PureFlix streaming service, and it's on airlines and DVDs. So you can check it out there right now and other places very soon.
Well, thank you so much.
Man, thank you, Jacob. It was fun to get to connect with you, and I'm excited to see what comes next.